Now let's look at some possible tipping points that are biological and social rather than physics-based, but still possibly very serious. There's soil and biomass carbon, permafrost and tundra warming, biodiversity and extinction, and air conditioning. So soil and biomass carbon. The basic idea here is that as the world gets warmer, that will change the biology across the world. It might make plants grow differently, we have different insect species, all sorts of changes will happen. These changes might sequester more carbon dioxide, but they might also release it. Now we know this has happened historically when there have been ice ages, the temperature has dropped, and large amounts of carbon dioxide has mysteriously disappeared from the atmosphere, and presumably it's been sequestered somehow by plants. This is tricky because people have done experiments. They will actually take forests in greenhouses and try changing the carbon dioxide level and the temperature level and see what happens. It seems that for moderate increases in temperature and CO2, it can be quite good, that the plants actually might grow a bit faster and therefore actually use up some of this excess CO2, so giving you negative feedback. But certainly when the temperature rises enough, things start to go very bad. For example, you start getting droughts in the Amazon, and this can lead to large deaths of large areas. It could be that if the world gets warm enough, you get a drought across all the rainforest regions. They turn into savanna, to grassland, and you lose the world's rainforest. And there's huge amounts of carbon in all those trees in the rainforest, which might all be released, therefore making things much worse. It could be something we've seen in the last few years, that as it gets warmer, you get enormous, terrible bushfires in temperate and polar regions. We've had terrible bushfires a few years ago in Australia, and enormous ones in Canada and in Siberia in the north of Russia, all of which is converting trees into carbon dioxide. So there are some more complicated procedures that as the climate changes, for example, you might get different plants growing, you might get different insect species. Maybe these insects will destroy more of the forest litter and release it. So it's really complicated. But it's certainly in the past, during ice ages, this has amplified climate change, and there's no reason to believe it wouldn't amplify climate change in the future, though that's complicated. And this could be a real worst case scenario if we really do find that if we warm things up, huge amounts of the carbon which is currently locked away in rainforests and other forests gets released. That could make climate change much, much worse very quickly. Second one of these possible tipping points is the threat to biodiversity. This is not so much a feedback loop as something that's irreversible. That as the climate changes, things are going to go extinct. Here, for example, is an estimate of the percentage of animal species and seagrasses that might be exposed to potentially dangerous conditions and therefore die out. And that's 30,000 species that might be at risk. A case of interest to Australia is that the Great Barrier Reef, already been very badly damaged by the extra heat, might just die out along with a whole bunch of species with it. This is not a feedback loop, it's not two equilibria, but it might just be that a lot of species go and it's irreversible. We might be able to do something about it. A lot of adaptation can take place. Species will adapt and move. Maybe the corals that currently grow in very hot areas might move further away from the poles. Or humans can maybe do something by, again, moving species around, removing other stressors and so on. So there's something you can do about it. And indeed, extinction may not be forever. People have talked about trying to use genetic engineering to bring back extinct species like the thylacine. But it's certainly a major problem. Another possibility is the air conditioning, which is a feedback loop. Basically, in many parts of the world, most of electricity in certain times of year is used to keep people cool by running air conditioning. But as we release more carbon dioxide, we're going to need more air conditioning because the weather's going to get hotter. Particularly tropical regions like India might, if global warming goes on, might have many months a year of lethally hot temperatures. It's already happening to some extent, where people without air conditioning will not survive. So the amount of electricity needed will get much larger, and if that's coming from coal-fired power plants, that's going to make global warming even worse. So you get the positive feedback loop. It does seem to be linear, there's no abrupt threshold. It makes things a bit worse, but not exponentially. And there are things we could do by using renewable electricity, more efficient buildings, or behavioural change.